Good evening, everybody. I would so much like to welcome you to a conversation about education here at Central Library. At this point, we've lost a bit of count, but this might be pretty close to 35 of these over the last 5 years. And with the library, WFYI has used this as an opportunity to be in conversation with folks about topics that really matter in our community. We're thrilled that tonight Opportunity is one of our partners in this, and we know that this is going to be a great conversation. We do have cameras operating tonight, so we won't be videotaping the films that you'll see, but we are going to videotape the conversation. So we'll need a few days to kind of get it cleaned up and put some titles on it and things, but you'll be able to capture this conversation at WFYI.org soon, and we'll send out an email when that's available. Well, my name is Gail Thomas Strong, and I'm on staff at WFYI, and I have the real pleasure of welcoming Dr. Michael Twyman to the stage tonight. I know that Michael knows many of you in the audience, and so I think you'll appreciate this comment, which is when Michael asks questions, they're always really good questions, and they're really hard questions, and they make you think, and then at the end of it, you think, wow, I really am glad I was able to answer that question. And I think that's what tonight's going to be, an opportunity for good, hard questions that will provoke and make us all think about things that are important. For those of you that might not know Michael so well, what you should know is that Michael has returned to Indianapolis. He has earned a couple of his degrees here, his master's degree and his doctoral degree here. He did his undergraduate at Fisk, and he was the first program officer for the Nina May Pulliam Charitable Trust. That's where I first encountered his wonderful hard questions. Thank you for those, Michael. And I loved those. But now he's come back home to Indy after a year or so away, and he's heading an important collective impact initiative, Opportunity, in the city, that's really focusing on quality of life and enhanced opportunities for African American men. So our opportunity tonight, I think, is to learn from Michael. He's put together a great panel that I'm sure will be inspirational as well. So Michael, the floor is yours.
Good evening. And don't believe a word that she said. Okay, it's so great to be here, and thank you so much for Gail, your very, very nice remarks, but more important, your friendship and being a co-laborer in this important work that we all do in the community in order to make it a better, safer, and hopefully a more hopeful one for the generations to come. It is my pleasure to welcome each of you here this evening. We know 5:30 is a tough time, particularly if you've worked all day and you're trying to make that transition to get to town or back to downtown, so we really appreciate the sacrifice. I know there'll be others that might be joining us here in the minutes to come. But just to give you a little bit of how the evening is going to proceed, we will start off with a film clip, which is a trailer that's entitled Daddy, Don't Go. And it really chronicles the lives of 4 gentlemen who are all living in New York, all dads, with different stories, different experiences, and come together to share those through their common bond of fatherhood. We will then move to a film where we'll watch the majority of that film, and it's entitled Bad Dad Rehab, which it was on TV1 during the Father's Day weekend here in 2016. And we will pick up after that film with a very provocative discussion with our panelists, who I will introduce right before they come forward at that portion of the evening, who will help unpack some of the messages and themes that are expressed and depicted in the films, as well as to hear from you and engage in a real thoughtful conversation around the importance of fathers, the importance of fatherhood as relates to their roles in their families, in the broader community, and how important it is to our overall society. So we have a wonderful evening ahead for the next a couple of hours, and we just invite you to enjoy and also to, at the appropriate time, to participate with your questions and or comments. And I think you'll really appreciate the panel that we've been able to assemble, who will share their insights, not only from their professional lens, but also from their very personal lens as well. I believe at this point we're probably cued and ready to go to the clip. All right, thank you, sit tight. Hopefully as you listen and watch the videos, there were a number of things that perhaps popped out to you. And these gentlemen that are taking their seats behind me are going to help us to process what we saw and what we heard, as well as to talk about some other issues that perhaps were not necessarily a part of the film, but relate to the subject matter at hand. So, in the order that they're seated, first gentleman here is Pastor Darrell Webster of the Emmanuel Missionary Baptist Church, who also heads up the men's boot camp. Hands, hearty applause for Pastor Webster. Seated to his left is Dr. Wallace McLoughlin, who is the longtime executive director of Fathers and Families Center here in Indianapolis. Dr. McLoughlin. Mr. James Wilson is the director of Circle Up and also is the focus area lead for Opportune Indy in our Justice and Reentry department, or division, I should say, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Brian Carter is with Villages and with Dads Inc., long time at Villages, and recently has taken over the directorship of Dads Inc. Mr. Carter. And last but not certainly least was Mr. Ryan Camp, who is an IUPUI student and a distinguished Nina Mason Pulliam Legacy Scholar. Mr. Camp. Thank you, thank you. So we're going to start off, and I'm going to ask you, not in any particular order, just as you feel the spirit, what were your reactions to what you saw in the Bad Dad Rehab film? What jumped out at you? What resonated with you in any particular way?
I would say it actually paints a picture, it's a microcosm of what we see today. Some fathers who are disconnected, some fathers who throw materialism at the problem, some dads who want to help but don't have the means to help, some dads who have children and neglected their responsibility. So there is a microcosm of diverse things going on as it relates to fathers being disconnected, reconnected, and owning up to their responsibility.
The movie resonated tremendously and brought back a lot of memories. Once upon a time in my life, I had unfortunate situations. And I ended up going to prison for almost 10 years, and that disconnect from that child, I understand. So each character I kind of related to somewhat. I was selfish when I was younger. I was a young father, I was a teenage father. Only thing I knew was me in the streets and making money. I love my shoes and my clothes and whatnot, but I never took the time to really look from the perspective of the women and whatnot and the things they went through. So it really resonated with me tremendously in that perspective.
Talk about maybe your relationship with your child during the time that you were in prison, and how were you able to keep any communication, if at all?
Oh wow, it was really hard. I was intimidated by all means, because as the years went by, he progressed and got older. When I went to prison, he wasn't even 2 years old. I didn't really have that relationship with him per se, because I didn't get a chance to know him. I missed his first steps. I was in and out even before then. Even before he was a year, I was still in and out the system. missed his first steps, missed his first words, and whatnot. I fought really hard to be in his life. I did. I came to a conclusion in prison, like, look, this is not it. This is not the example I want to leave for my children. So it's time to do something different. Challenge yourself. So I did. So I wrote my son every day, and I never received a response. I wrote him every week. I never received a response. I wrote him every month, all the way up until the time I came home, and I never received a response until a month before I came home. And that month before I came home, it wasn't my son that responded, it was his mother. In that one situation in the film, I believe Sean was a young brother that was dealing with a conflict with his son's mother, and my son's mother was extremely like that, if not more aggressive. So to be in my son's life was a challenge for me. There was that disconnect there from me and her, you know, bad blood. So her way of punishing me was to keep my son away from me. So I always thought, and I wondered, when I was in the hole for 2 years, and I always thought about my son, if he's getting my letters, if he even knows my name, you know, if he knows what I look like. I sent pictures home to him, you know. I felt that strong disconnect, and I felt that hurt, and I felt that yearning to be in his life. And so I continued to fight to be in his life. I mean, he and I, you know, we're very acclimated. He's a teenager. So when I came home, you know, he's in his preteens, and I see that in my mind, you know, I'm kind of nostalgic, you know. Only thing you see is what you remember before you go in. And when I came home, I see a young man. I didn't know how to feel at all, because in my mind, I'm still this teenager that went to prison, and now I'm back out here in reality. I'm faced with being a dad. What do I do next? So my son and I, that's my roadie. I love my son to death. But I made it a focus to build that relationship with him.
Anyone else want to comment?
What stuck out for me was you can't be a dad when it's convenient. You got to be a dad every minute of every day. And that's been something that's been rough for me personally. I've got 3 kids, and it's something that is always a challenge. There's always something new that's coming at me that I've never dealt with before. And at this point in my life, I've realized that I don't expect myself to have all the answers, but there are people around me that are willing to help out.
Talk a little bit about the balance that you've had, and maybe others as well, being a student, being employed, being a husband and a father. How do you juggle all those demands and responsibilities at one time?
Oh my gosh. You always got to keep throwing a ball in the air. So, you know, there's some things that I got to push back. There are some things that I got to jump in and do now when I maybe don't feel like I'm so ready. So I feel so lucky that, so I have, my eldest is 12, and he's from a previous relationship. I've been with my wife for 10 years now, and we have 2, an 8 and a 3-year-old. And schedule's always changing. With my oldest, sharing a kid is one of the hardest things that I've ever done in my life. There's a whole different dynamic when Phoenix is my oldest, and when he's around, my middle boy wants to spar with him for that, you know, that top-notch position. And realizing how different each of these children are, and that they call for a different response from me as a father, is something that I've had to really learn to be flexible with. So one big thing for me has been to let go of expectation and be okay with where everybody is right now.
I think for me, the challenge has been in terms of being a father, and I think I can speak differently from anybody else on the stage because I'm probably the oldest one. But at the same time, my wife and I are blessed with having a 7-year-old child. And I reached 60. And so, so therein you see the challenge. And I'm just saying it's been a challenge, and I love it now, don't get it wrong. Well, not only that, but I think it's important also being a father also with a child with special needs. And balancing that and work and pastoring and et cetera. And what's been interesting, and I'm grateful for, but one, physically, how do you get on the floor and get back up? And then how do you get in their space? Because my son want to play Xbox. I don't even know, I really don't know anything about Xbox. I mean, it's just, but quality time is something that's going to come up later in the conversation, but investing quality time is critical for fathers, whether they are absent from the home or not. What measures the relationship with a child is the quality of time that you spend with the child. Yes. And you have to find what turns them on. And I have to get in their world, whether you have to get down on the floor with them. I got to learn. I may have to get somebody to instruct me on Xbox for Dummies so that I can. But that's how he communicates. And if I can't do that, then it's going to be very hard for me to fulfill my responsibilities as a father.
Mike, my children are adults, 26 and 24, and I'm not a grandparent yet, almost 50. And we're finding unique ways, you know, to interact, because I'm always going to be a dad, you know, and before they go, one's engaged, and before it's time for them to establish families themselves, it's like this is the perfect opportunity to just talk about family, reinforce family, just some of the things that they may have forgotten or whatever, to kind of go over that again, and then really see what's going on in their lives now. So I may email them with 2 pages of just questions or things that, this is what's going on in my life. This is the song that I'm rocking to right now. This is, you know, the funniest thing that happened to me within the last month. And we've been able to kind of communicate and open up just new avenues in that way.
Excellent. Talk, any of you, about being physically present and emotionally absent as it relates to relationships with your children, and maybe the effects it has on the children, and if there are any differences between boys and girls, how that plays out. Physically present, emotionally absent.
My dad had, I come from a family of 15, 11 boys and 4 girls. From my experience, we were athletes. Dad never made a game. He was physically in the home, but emotionally disconnected. Now, I'm not so hard on him because I think he learned that behavior from his father. You know, after they worked all day and then they got to come home, and you got all of these little boys running around and girls running around, they probably didn't know what to say. And in one sense, we were happy that he was there. In another sense, he never really affirmed us. And I was lecturing for the Graduate School of Social Work at WFYI. I was co-lecturing with Dr. Lorraine Blackman. And one of the things that kept coming up in our discussion was that sometimes dad can do much damage by being in the house, but sending you to mom for all the answers. And one of the things I've learned, even though when I was coming up, was that I vowed to, I have 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, and they're grown. But I vowed, my mother was the affectionate one. She's the one who gave all the hugs, and she was the one who done all of the affirmation. And so, you know, whereby dad was there, and I was happy to have him there. Emotionally, he was somewhat disconnected, and I had to learn. Once I've been married to my wife for 32 years, I had to learn how to affirm my children. I had to learn how to speak into to their emotions. So what I started doing was, I've been preaching for a while now, over 30 years. I prayed with them just about every morning when my children were little. I would also drop them off at school and kiss my girls. And one day, one lady said to me, it's important for you to kiss your boys too. You know, and sometimes I think the whole issue is that we have a lot of learned behavior. And men have not been really taught how to come alongside and add value emotionally to their children.
To kind of piggyback off of that, and I understand from the perspective of having that disconnect with a father, but mine is more so from the perspective of my mother. I never had a father growing up, and we have a huge family, so a lot of us. And, you know, how I look now and how I talk now, you know, 10 years ago, that wasn't it by any means. And so the way I was raised in the streets as a savage, like literally. For a lot of people that know my past, I won't go into it too much, but there was no such thing as emotion. Emotion got you killed. To care about something, you're going to die. So in my mind, I felt like if I was at war with somebody in the streets, you dig what I'm saying? And things went, excuse me for speaking a little bit Ebonics, but I'm going to relate a little bit. But that's what's up. So, you know, my mind is, you know, especially when I had my son, and when my son was first born, it was a time in my life that it was hectic. I shouldn't be here in front of you. It was I was involved in a lot of shootouts, a lot of, you know, unfortunate things, you know, and whatnot. And I ended up getting shot. I got shot at 16 in the back with an AK-47, and I was partially paralyzed and whatnot from my waist down. And my son's mother was just pregnant with my son at the time. And I didn't know how to feel. Even laying in that bed, the only thing I kept thinking about, I can't wait to get out of this hospital so I can go kill this dude who just shot me. It wasn't thinking about will I live to see my son, and what condition will I be in, will I be a good father. I didn't care about that because there was that non-emotion there. So when my son was born, I was nervous, I was scared. I didn't know how to feel because the streets taught me not to care. And the reason I didn't care and didn't want to care when I was younger, because if I was in a situation, and excuse me for being honest, but I'm just going to be real with y'all. If I was in a situation when it was my son's life or his life when I was younger, it wasn't going to be me. And that's how I felt. That's how disconnected emotionally that I felt. Because in my mind, I couldn't feel that emotion, because if somebody decided to take my son because of me, I didn't want to feel that pain. I didn't want to feel that hurt. I didn't want to feel that agony. I didn't want to experience that thing called emotion. And it's a common misconception amongst men that we are not allowed to be emotional. We got to be tough. You know, we got to be hard or whatever it may be, but that emotion is important. And so when I got older and I understood that emotion and I started making that connection with my son, it changed the world. Because my son tried to commit suicide a little bit after I came home because his mother kept him away from me. He yearned for his father. And I kept fighting to be in his son's life. I kept fighting to be in my son's life. And that emotion, overwhelming the possibility of losing my son, hit me so hard. I fought even harder. And I wouldn't even know that I was there. Now my son, you know, he's doing great. You know, he has that ground, and he feels like that he got his daddy back. And one of the coolest things in the world that really hit me hard, I remember my son, when I first came home, he told me, he said, "Dad, I used to be embarrassed of you." I said, "Why?" He said, "When we had, you know, Parents' Day at school, and, you know, they asked him, 'Where's your dad at?' He said, 'I got to tell him you locked up.'" But you know the coolest thing to that, though? A couple years ago, my life changed tremendously when I started Circle Up and whatnot, and met Dr. McLoughlin when I just came home from prison and whatnot, and I was determined to do things differently. And I wanted my son to see it. The only thing I fought for, I didn't care to fight about nobody else's approval, because everybody's going to feel the way they feel about me. They thought I was going to come home, go back to jail, be dead, whatever. But I said I need to be in my son's life. So I said I want my son to be proud of me. So I started getting involved in the things I love to do, helping people in the community and so on and so forth. And my son see me on the news. When he called me, he said, "Dad, I just seen your interview on the news." He said, "Man, it was awesome." Derrick Rose was his favorite. And my son told me, you know, he ended up telling me one day that, "Dad," he said, "I don't like Derrick Rose no more." He said, "I like you. I look up to you." That's what I fought to make happen. That's what I fought to make happen. And you talking about the greatest joy in the world, I was like, oh man, that's what's up. Like, I can't play basketball like Derrick Rose, but it's a good start, you know. But I was excited that, you know, he was alleviated of all that pressure, you know, that he was in conflict to even care about me, because his mother told him one thing about me. His mother only told him the street side about me. So I said, okay, let me show you the good side about me. Let me show you what I can really do. And to have that relationship with my son and have him so proud of me, and I'm so proud to be his father and be in his life, that's awesome.
I want to pick back up, Dr. McLoughlin, on the experience you've had, because it probably affects a number of parents, around having a special needs child. And of course, you, with your education and knowledge, have certain resources at your disposal that many others may not have. Talk about even what that challenge has been, working with different systems, as well as just trying to be the best parents and particularly father for your child who has different needs.
Thank you. One of the things I would say first, it has been a challenge to go from the personal to the professional. The agency, the Fathers and Family Center, a couple of years ago did a symposium on fathers with children with special needs. And what was interesting, though, first of all, it was very difficult to get the message out to the community, in particular the African American community. There's still some stigma and shame associated with having children with special needs. And there were some, for example, one of my pastor friends told one of his congregants, now he's talking to the father and the child is there, and Stevie Wonder can see the child has Down syndrome. And with an attitude, he said, well, what are you telling me about the symposium for? What it has to do with me? Well, it has everything. So one is that I took my own personal journey because it came from my experience in the center, and one guy said that when he learned out that his child had Down syndrome, he was ashamed. Matter of fact, they had to take him out of the hospital because he just started throwing the lamps around. And it was a year or two before he would go and see the child. So one, I realized that I wanted to help other fathers deal with, because the research says that oftentimes fathers abandon and the relationship goes south once they, it's somewhat kind of an insult to the manhood to find out their child has cerebral palsy or Down syndrome or autistic, and is it me and what did I do wrong? And I would be first to admit when the doctor, after my wife and I adopted, and the doctors told us that I was something. Now, we were fortunate that he just has Asperger's or PDD-NOS and is highly intelligent and functional. And so I didn't think I could deal with it, but what I learned was the more you educate yourself, we read all the books, I went to all the conferences, then I didn't feel so threatened. I didn't feel so fearful that I could not master and handle it. And my wife was reading, and so also we had the conference. But I think we have been challenged with all the evaluations and the school system telling you, we are highly educated in one sense. And I can imagine if you don't have the education and the skill sets and the resources, because there are school systems that are going to try to tell you that they don't want to use those resources to pay for an IEP. And tell you, and for an example, I have a young lady in my congregation, and her son is special needs, occupation defined disorder, ADHD, on and on and on. And I won't name the school system, but they were telling her that she didn't qualify for an IEP, and she ought to just, take a 504. But it's a fight that you have to, and you have to. I've tried, and I'm going to try again, in working with John Dickerson, that used to be the executive director of ARC, because I still want to have forums on fathers with special need. What the men need is a support group, a place of grace, a space of grace where you can be vulnerable, you can cry, you can be weak, because some people celebrate my son or child graduated from high school or the basketball. But fathers and parents with children with special needs have to celebrate the fact that my son now is out of diapers and he's 9 years old. It's a different kind of celebration. And there are some painful stories, but we can do things better in support groups and in community together. It's just I think it's another lens of fatherhood that we ignore. and leave a lot of fathers out there on an island by themselves. And let me just say this also, I really have to say this, I think it's important. There were some men in the workshop who said that they were really hurt by the faith community because the church says everybody's welcome. Come as you are. We have special days, you can wear what you want to do. But that does not mean when it says come as you are, if your child will make loud outburst noise and grunts and sound. And so he said he did not feel welcome in the church because his child, he literally cried and said that he did not have the support from the faith community. And even my son, and I had to educate my congregation, he has sensory needs. So the loud noise, he has to wear earphones. Certain things, the light will affect him, so you have to adjust that. And I think we need to do a better job as a community, particularly, I'm going to be quite honest, the African American community in church, of ministering to children with special needs.
Amen. Amen. That's a perfect segue, Pastor Webster. Tell the audience a little bit about the men's boot camp and focus on the issue of accountability, because I think that came up clearly in the film that we saw, but also talk about your 4 Ps in terms of how that's lived out through the boot camp.
Thanks, Doc. Again, I've been doing boot camp for 11 years, and in boot camp, we used the analogy that as soldiers need to go to boot camp to learn how to fight for their country, so do men need boot camp to learn how to be better men, better fathers, better husbands. We have a principle that says that you can't give what you don't have, and you got to know yourself to grow yourself. And so for the last 11 years, I see 150 to 300 men in the worst zip code in the city of Indianapolis at 5:45 a.m. in the mornings. We are right now doing the boot camp. This is our second week, and we're running about 150 men and boys at 5:45 a.m. And one of the things that I heard one of the my colleagues say is that we need a community and a safe place. First of all, where we can come and talk about the worst issues in our lives and not be judged. And we don't give them coffee, we don't give them donuts. Mothers drop their kids off that early in the morning. This year, we are talking about the ABCs of being a champion. How do we build champions? And we're also doing this in the prison system. This is our first pilot in the prison system this year, too. But one of the A's is accountability. And one of the things as it relates to fatherhood, we have to work on keeping fathers accountable, number one, to their responsibility. Your child did not ask to get here, but once your child come here, you have a responsibility. We engage them through devotional lessons, small groups, equipping them not just for their responsibility, but giving them tools to have doability. And we have to do that through real tough conversations, And when you think about the conversations of helping young boys and men from all walks of life, accountability is very, very important. A lot of us as fathers and men, we don't have anybody to keep us accountable. And so when you don't have anybody to keep you accountable, you sometimes take lessons from yourself or what you've learned. And so what we have done, we have several of the boot camp guys are here today. We've built a model, not the model, but a model for the last 11 years where boys and men can come and get life skills, soft skills, fatherhood responsibilities, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's amazing that we don't advertise. We don't advertise because, and one of the things in the documentary, Doc, men do want help. Yes. You know, we have to kill the fallacy that men don't want a way to help their children. They do, they just don't know how. And one of the things that we focus on is not just the education of the man, but the transformation of the man's character. And when you transform, because you can be educated and still not be a good father. That's right. You can make a lot of money like that fella in the movie, but he was disconnected from his daughter. So we work through these complex issues, and that accountability partner, one of his jobs is to call you daily. To call you daily. Even after the event is over, somebody's got to call you daily. And then we assign them, if there's an issue between you and your child, you need a coach or a mentor. We have somebody to walk through a process with them. And most fathers want progress, but they don't have process. And the difficult thing is that, let me say this and I'll stop. We're dealing with systemic issues in fathers and unresolved issues that's been with fathers for years. And a lot of the social programs don't fix them. You know, you think about, you were talking about being disconnected emotionally. My dad was an alcoholic for the biggest of his life. In the 3rd grade, they told my mom to send me to see a psychiatrist. They thought I was crazy, because I went to school and acted out all of that trauma that was in me. But I do thank God my mother was a dear Christian woman. And what kept me focused is connecting with other fathers who said, hey, I'll come alongside of him and take him on.
Could one of you maybe speak to standing in the gap, recognizing that particularly in the African American community, almost 3/4 of our children are living in households without a father present full time. The math won't work in terms of us being able to fix that. So some of us have to take on roles beyond that of our own family. So speak to the issue of standing in the gap and being extended family.
That's funny, Mike. We do a Nurturing Fathers program in the prison system at the Heritage Trail facility in Plainfield. And we were talking just yesterday about the fact that somebody's going to have to stand in the gap. So we polled the group and said, how many of you all were raised by a stepfather, were raised by, a boyfriend, and that sort of thing. And then we weighed out who had positive experiences, who had negative experiences. And we talked about the importance of when you're contemplating dating, a woman who has children, and the likelihood that when they get out that they might date someone who has children, as to how are you going to treat these children? How are you going to, you need to commit to be able to treat these children as they were your own. And if you can't do that, you can be so damaging to, that child in that household. And so, really just encouraging men who have come through situations of not having a father in the home, and letting them know the community. There's a grandfather. There's when we do All Pro Dads at the schools, a lot of people say, well, that's for dads. I'm not a dad. And we'll have big brothers come, we'll have uncles, we'll have community, the man that lives next door, whoever is standing in the guise of a father image, and unfortunately, young people cleave to father images that are in the streets. So it's important for us to be able to share ourselves. I was a youth pastor for 10 years, so, I was able to share myself. But, there's some awesome, the Villagers works with grandparents that are, starting to take care of the children, similar to what was going on with the Pierre situation in the film. And it's very commendable you know, and we help with the training with that, but we have to step in for the missing fathers, even the incarcerated fathers. You know, a brother needs to step in and be that go-between, because these children are suffering.
I would just say, I think we have to keep some things in mind too. I think it can be a misnomer to conclude that just because the father is not in the house, and even though there's about 74% of the fathers may not be in the house, that does not necessarily equate to father involvement. That's correct. And so there was a study done by the Pew Study recently, in particular said that 72% of fathers are actively involved in the lives of their children. Now, to what degree and stuff like that. But I also want to get the high end of the positive correlation of fathers' involvement in the lives of their children. But I think the other thing with what Brian's saying, but it's a difficult time and challenging. I think the key, you can have different people to fill in mentoring program, my agents and other programs who are doing the work in churches, but it's very daunting because one, and even for churches to do work, because in particular with millennials and a lot of other people today, there's a disconnect with this younger generation from the church. And so what the church used to do and could do, can't do now because there's a disconnect. So we have a lot of work to do, but David Brooks, in one of his books, Road to Character, talks about, when he was speaking at Clues Hall at Butler a few weeks ago with Tavis Mowley, noted that there are a lot of programs, and programs can't do everything. But he did say that the best thing to bring about transformation in the lives of individuals is relationship. And my challenge is that even when you do mentoring programs, some other thing, you have to be invested in it for a lifetime, a long time. You just can't pop in and just do some mentoring here and there. And that's the challenge, where people are so overwhelmed with their own lives that we're going to also pour into other people's lives. But it's those relationships with those coaches, those teachers, those pastors, those people in the community, uncles and everybody else, because once that relationship is formed, that's where transformation comes about.
Absolutely. Ryan, can you speak to maybe what things you borrowed from your dad in terms of if he was active and involved in your life, or whatever his example was to you, that you now use and apply with your own children, and what things have you tweaked and changed a little bit?
My dad was a workaholic as I was growing up. He was there, but it was the sort of situation where he'd come home and fall asleep looking at the newspaper, sort of thing. I don't have a ton of memories of doing things with him, and I always really wanted that. So now I work to do things with my kids. I'll get on the floor and I'll play with them, or I'll find that game that we can play together. And I actively work to heal that, as I know that I'm carrying that along with me still, and that's the only way I can work through it is with my kids. So, I mean, there were tons of great things that my dad did for me. But what I really remember is wanting more and more of him, and that he wasn't available. And maybe he was available for me in the way that worked for him, and my needs were just a little bit different. But I feel like, what we're hearing is that we need to show up and we need to be vulnerable. It's the only way that we're going to forge real relationships with the people in our lives. And that's tough. That's not an easy thing to do. And it's okay for there to be a challenge when you come home from work, I think. It's okay to face that challenge and rise to the occasion. I think we've got it in us.
Before we shift to the audience, for those of you who have daughters, what is different, one, about your relationship with your daughters versus your son? I know that would apply to you, Pastor Webster, with having two of each, correct? Yes. Or both, two of both. We talk or hear a lot about the importance of father-son relationships, but why are father-daughter relationships important?
I think the real reason why father and daughter's relationship is important. You have to affirm both your sons and your daughters. But I think the first image of what a man should be like, the daughters need to see it in dad. Secondly, I think, that the businessman who had the daughter in the movie, I think the daughter was disconnected and hurt because dad could buy her materialism, but what she really wanted was his love and relationship. With my own daughters, one of the things I've tried to do down through the years, and my daughters are my heart, is that I try to be intentional about speaking into their life. One of my daughters wrestled for a long time. She was overweight, and she was a severe asthmatic. And sometimes I would see my wife get frustrated trying to just keep her pretty with buying nice clothes because she wore big clothes, being overweight, et cetera, et cetera. But I always affirmed her. I always told her that she was pretty. I always told her that she was very smart. I always told her that by being a pastor, that God had a major plan for her. And even now, I have a daughter that's still at home with me that's 25 years old. I still speak positive affirmation to her. I think it's so important for dads. I still kiss my daughters at 20 and 30 years old. I work hard to keep the relationship open emotionally. I think young girls wander into the hands of guys who don't care about them because they miss dad's love. It's so easy for a young girl, or a young boy too. A young boy will roll off into a game because he misses dad's love. But since we're talking about young girls right now, and so what's really great, when my oldest daughter is married, and she wrote me a note and said, "In my husband, I tried to pick a husband with the same qualities as my dad."
I have two stepdaughters, and I hate the word step, they my daughters. But before I go into that, I have to say that their father, I have a lot of respect and love for this man. He passed last year. He was killed, unfortunately, last year. But that brother laid the foundation for his girls. He set the example of what it means to be a good father. So I got all boys. And so he set the bar high, by all means, for me. But it was a good challenge. It was a great challenge. So with my girls, I talk to them, I spend time with them. I try to be the example that their father was to them so they can see what it looks like to have a good man and to be a good man or have a good man in their life. Because what I don't want them to just go pick some random on whatnot on the street, pistols, dope, and everything, all that crazy stuff. I don't want that for my kids. As you can see right now in the news, they're killing young ladies too. It's just the reality. And I don't want to wake up, and I got a 20-year-old stepdaughter, she's going to turn 21. I stay on her all the time about, making sure that she's surrounding herself around good people. She kind of like, she was in this bad boy phase for a while, so she met this good guy. He came over to the house, and he was like, I don't kind of like him. He's too nice. I could run over him. I said, look, that's the type of man you need. I'm just being real. Because, do you want a man that's going to put their hands on you, slap you, put you in harm's way, and tell you that they love you? Like that brother in the video. He told all of them the same thing. Yes. What makes you think you special? Yeah. Right. And so if I set that example high, especially for my 7-year-old, if I set that bar high for her, she can see, oh, wow, my dad, he got up, he grind, he took care of us, he sacrificed, he spent time, he showed me that he loves me, he do his homework, you do my homework with me, check on my homework. She knows that I'm there. She knows that, this is a good man, this example of what I see as a good man, and that's the type of man I want her to have. I don't want her to just bring anything home, God forbid, because I don't want to see my daughter put in a situation where it can end up ultimately costing her life.
All right, we're going to transition real quick. Are there any questions or comments in the audience?
Michael, we've got index cards.
Okay.
We can't get mics.
All right, you want to?
If you have another question.
Okay, while you're doing that, okay. Very good. Well, we have lots of questions. One, I want to transition, kind of going more with the theme of the evening. We talked about the importance of time. We talked about the importance of quality time. can you be even more specific about how father involvement really can come alongside our kids relative to them not only pursuing their dreams career-wise, but even in terms of their educational process? How can dads and how are dads being positively involved in the life of their kids as it relates to their education?
As I said earlier, we're helping to go alongside All Pro Dads, and we're really proud that we're getting involved in the IPS schools, because before it was more in the outer townships. And to see those dads connect with the parent involved educator and just really become familiar with the school system. A friend of mine, he always talks about traditionally there were just 3 men in the school. One was the principal, one was the coach, and one was the janitor. Exactly. And I even recall going to my son's school and for nothing, and the staff getting paranoid. May we help you? May we help you? You know, and it's like, what's wrong? And it's like, I'm here to see. I'm here to, and when they saw me and saw that I was concerned, they then began to say, do you know little so-and-so? Would you like to help out with him? You know, and so it did show the need for dads to be involved in the school system. But the school system also needs to be inviting to the dads as far as programs, after school programs, and we're starting to see some of those great things, you know, go on as far as like catering to the morning dads, and then having something for the evening dads based on their work schedules, because they do want to get involved. And then with the technology that with the school having apps and different things that dads can check with and read syllabuses that come home and different things that they sign off on. It's very important, because I remember doing that too, saying, this is all my information. I want to know everything there is to know about my son. If my son gets in trouble or fails, and I'm just now hearing about it at the end of the semester, you have failed my son. Yeah.
Another thing I think is important, at least we tell the men at the Fathers and Family Center, is that one, yes, you certainly should be involved in the school system, but a lot of fathers, particularly young fathers, are intimidated with the school system, and or sometimes not respected because they are not the custodial parent. But there are some things you can do, and I tell the young men that we work with, one, you can always read to your kids at night. That's critical in terms of development. Reading is fundamental. But another thing that I think is also critical is also what traditions do you establish besides every holiday, in particular Christmas and things like that. Give them gifts of books that will help their development and learning in the long term, instead of just always giving them toys and Xbox. One of the things in the most recent book I was reading about the collapse of parenting is that we're really going to have to teach parents to regulate children's time they spend on the computer and games. Because that is saturating a lot of their times. One of the guys told me in the program, he said, Dr. Wallace, because I was telling him my son wanted to play Xbox all the time, and he said, well, my son want to play Xbox, and I tell him to get off and go do something else. I said, but what is that something else? You're going to have to direct them in
PlayStation.
But you're going to have to direct them in something constructive. And I'll also tell the parents at the young fathers in our agency, you need to take the computer and television out of their bedroom so that they can really focus on their academic work and be present at the school, and not only be present, but volunteer. And last thing, I also tell them all to get a College 529 plan for the future of their child's education.
Yes, good stuff. Did you want to ask?
I just wanted to say, you know, piggybacking off of Dr. McLoughlin, one of the things I've learned is that, you know, technology is good. It was supposed to bring all of us together. But technology has separated a lot of families. and we have become very high tech, but low touch. And what I'm seeing as I deal with the families that I deal with, kids will get up, even my grandkids, we had them on vacation. They'll get up early in the morning with all of the technology on. They'll bring it to the table. You watch families when couples are out, they're looking at their cell phones. We're going to have to get back to some very foundational things, talking at the dinner table with no cell phones. Not just quantity time, but quantity time in a quality type way. Then we have to be intentional about doing those sorts of things. Because if not, we're going to lose that relationship with our children in the name of educating them and teaching them to be high tech.
This question is, what are the top 5 things that every dad must do to assure that their child knows that they are loved? And so we got 5 folks on the panel. Isn't it funny how that works? So you can't repeat. So you get to go first, Pastor Webster, because you're to my left. What's the one thing that a child will know that he's loved by you doing what?
Affirming him.
Okay, affirming.
Consistency. Do what you say you're going to do.
Consistency, that's a good one.
Display of key emotions.
Displaying, being emotionally
Yes.
connected.
Yes.
Okay,
Physical contact, face-to-face touch.
yes. Sometimes roughhouse, or even playing with the dollhouse,
Yeah.
whatever. Yes,
And meeting them where they are.
meeting them where
You gotta
they are.
you got to go to their level.
Yes. How can small agencies partner with viable programs to connect boys and men they work with, because they don't have the revenue, but they have the population? So if I understand the question, maybe small group or effort that doesn't have a lot of capacity in terms of wherewithal of staff, but they are seeing lots of need and lots of people. So how can they perhaps join up with the fathers and families or with the villages in order to have a greater impact?
Well, I think one, we certainly welcome that. One of the challenges we're having as an agency is that we cannot reach our tentacles everywhere in the community, but we have a need to serve fathers, and our mandate is just to serve fathers regardless of whatever age. And we like the opportunity to go in the community to do fatherhood classes, to partner with churches who will sponsor us to have our recognition ceremony. But we would love to welcome the opportunity to work with other agencies. If you know where the young men are and we can partner and develop some kind of programming together, we welcome that opportunity.
If I may piggyback on that, Circle Up Indy in itself is moving into a whole nother component, and we're soon to launch our youth employment initiative. So with that being said, I really hate to say, looking at big organizations, small organizations, we all do the work. So we're really big, and one of the biggest things that I push is building those partnerships and building those relationships, and kind of piggybacking on what Dr. Wallace said. They can't be everywhere. We can't do everything. And if you're really in this in the long run, as Pastor said earlier, if you're in this for the long run and you got that passion, you got that drive, it's going to take a lot of work and take a lot of grind, but you formulate and build those strong partnerships for the things that you may or may not have.
In our organization, we have several agencies. Stop the Violence, Anthony Beverly is a part of the boot camp. Recently, we have Greg Strand is up there in Beth. They are City Mosaic. They are part of the boot camp. So we have a lot of little agencies, even though we come together for instructions of the morning. We are made up of major agencies because we say it like this: what can we do together that we can't do apart? And it's better if we can attack these issues together. Nobody has to be chief. And we support one another. And even some of the funding that we get, we share that funding with the agencies that's a part of us.
If I could say something, Mike, the villages, we have Prevent Child Abuse Indiana and Dads Inc. teaming together, and we offer free services. We go and do the instruction that's free. So it's just a matter of them reaching out, and we can get some partnerships going on.
Great. With the high number of single moms raising boys, what advice can you give to women about how to raise a boy to manhood?
I'm not going to attempt to answer that question, but that is a critical topic. And matter of fact, I'm doing a workshop, the Fathers and Families, and I'm leading that workshop at Eastern Star Church. And we did it last semester. We're doing it again this year about mothers raising sons. There are a lot of issues because you have to address the father's absence. You have to address the developmental stages the young boy is going in. You have to address the impact of the absence of that father in his life. And sometimes you cannot fill that gap, and you got to get other mentors to fill that gap. Sometimes you need counseling because he's hurt and he's acting out. And what I'm planning on doing in the spring with Eastern Star is to have a symposium on mothers raising sons because it's a critical issue. And I'm not going to say that it's the result, but there's a correlation. Well, y'all already know where I'm going. I hadn't even said it. But I'm saying there's a correlation because it is. And my sister, a couple of sisters raised a son, raising a son. One did well, the other. It's a struggle. It's a challenge with two parents raising a child. I cannot unimagine sometimes what a single mother goes through with raising children on their own, and so
Or a single father.
A single father, and so we want to bring resources to bear, but without any particular issue, I really cannot say. But we're trying to address that, and we're going to have some workshops on that in the future. One of the things I told one of the women, and it was not received that well. But even for a mother raising a son, be always very careful in terms of when you're dating, that you are potentially forming a relationship. And therefore, be very careful and scrutinize who you are dating, because then if you enter into a relationship, you got to also get buy-in with those children. And then I've seen a lot of mothers will put the relationship before the child. I've seen some of the guys in the program don't have anywhere to stay because the mom put them out because the boyfriend moved in. I tell a lot of mothers, please don't be so quick to have your children and call him daddy, because he may be there just for a couple of weeks. And then the other problems with mothers raising sons, oftentimes the problem is a lot of the young guys will tell us, you thrust me into the role of manhood prematurely, and therefore I had to go and do what I had to do to help things at home. Right. That young man should still be a boy and grow up and not take on the responsibilities of manhood.
So if I may, I think it's so important, especially for all the single mothers out here that raise young men. It's simple. Don't be afraid to say you need help. It's just that simple. We all need help some form or another. I get phone calls in the middle of the night all the time. I have to rip a run and go, because they may not be my kids, but they call me for help. So, if they need that help, there's tons of programs like Father Family, the Villages. You got the boot camp. You got tons of programs that's out there. You got Bloom Project Inc. You got tons of programs that's out there that's willing to help you develop that child, that young boy, into a man.
Well, and don't wait too long. And let me just say this also. I got to say this. Oftentimes, what I get stories of mothers pulling their hair out of how I'm going to deal with this son, but you left the father out. And when the father wanted to be involved in the life of the child, you cut him out of the picture. And now you want to say, you handle him. It's almost too late. And so, and that's what we want to talk about. How do you still have the father involved in the life of that child? There must be a working relationship with the mother and the father in the best interest of the child. I've always said at Fathers and Family Center, the best parents are both parents.
Yeah. Can I say something also, Doc? My mother is 85 years old, and her and my dad divorced. I was in the 6th grade after being married 25 years. And my mother, and let me quote her, one of the things she used to tell us is that, if you're going to grow up to be good, strong men, first of all, you got to respect yourself. And she demonstrated that respect because I never seen another man brought into that house over her children. She was a model of what respect looked like. Second, she said, I'm going to teach you responsibility. In other words, we were never on welfare. And she had 15 children. We would go and cut grass. We would shine shoes. And she taught us responsibility, and we brought the money home and gave it to her. Thirdly, she said, look, y'all get summer jobs. She said, y'all going to split half of y'all money with me. Reverence. We had that respect and reverence for our mother. And I remember saying, why, Mama? She said, because I work all year long and you only work for 8 weeks. And then we had that village. She took us to church. And I watched my mother, man, I would watch my mother pray, call our names out before God. And I think, you know, my mother only had a 6th grade education, but she had a major foundation as it relates to her relationship with Almighty God. And today she have all of these sons and daughters who's finished college. But she said it's respect, it's responsibility, it's reliability, and it's prayer. I think mothers can still raise boys, because my mother today, I'm really a product of my mother.
We're going to end with this one, and I think we have answered, but maybe you want to respond in a different way, each of you. In 1855, the writer says, Frederick Douglass said, "It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. At what point will we stop making excuses and proactively build men from birth who will become strong fathers?"
You go first. You done read something on this.
That was a PhD question, so yes, Dr. McLoughlin.
And then I'll give you a practical one.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead now. You go. I got to listen to you first.
But I still think, I don't know what comes first, the chicken or the egg. I still think that in order to raise children to be man-childs and raise them up, you still really you got to strengthen the family. Fathers have to be actively involved in the life of the children, and there has to be a cooperative relationship. Fathers, you know, when I was looking at the film, one of the things that I saw missing, one of the challenges I think for fathers want to, I think, somebody once said, I mean, wives want to be loved and fathers wanted to be respected. And one, you got to earn the respect, but you also got to receive it. And oftentimes, men are not respected, one, because they didn't earn it, but two, because of systemic barriers, child support, child welfare. Mothers still are the gatekeeper. And then we often leave him out, and sometimes in their earnest effort of trying to be involved, they see him as a dollar, as a walking wallet, and not respecting him for his manhood. So I think once we can work to put fathers step up to the plate, whether they're living in the house or not living in the home, then collectively and individually in the community, we can raise up a new generation, because we're losing a generation. Now, I don't know what I said, but I think if I was saying...
It sounded good.
It sounded good.
Could you read the last part of that question again?
At what point will we stop making excuses and proactively build men from birth who will become strong fathers?
Now, I think one of the things we have to understand is that, you know, I don't think we're making a lot of excuses as much as it's not having the answers. We got the theory. You know, scholars got the statistics. I think where we suffer at is having the practicality to show our young men how to become men. Because let's think about it, a lot of them have been dehumanized. Some of them haven't been taught how to be a man. Some of them seen role models as a man. And so we have to find something that works. And I think you're talking about building broken men. One boot camp, I did a piece on a man in his wounds. And I dealt with his father wound, self-inflicted wound, relationship wound. In fact, I got a book that it's not out. We sent it to the publisher, and it's called Where There's a Wound, There's a Way. And I found out, you see, wounded men will wound other people. There's a book out called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Wallace Fier, and it says that we learn the behavior of our oppressors. Yes. I think a lot of the brokenness in men are learned behaviors. And when we go to attack it, some of the scholars, they got it in theory, but they don't have it in practicality. What I have, I think, is I have it in practicality, but they argue with me in theory. But I have a lot of men here. You know, men don't get up at 5:45 a.m. in the morning if nothing is happening. And I think we have to start where guys are. You know, one of the problems is that I think last year I done a camp on back to the basics. We start too high. And sometimes we assume that even though a man has children, that he's a father and that he's been taught how to be a father. What I'm finding out is that you can't assume anything. And when we down the ABCs of being a father, the first thing I said with admit that you don't know it all. A lot of men, when you talk about, Doc, helping men, fixing broken men, it's a process. It is a process. And sometimes you learn what they really need in relationship. You know, and, you know, our system has a lot of transactional things, but there's no quick fix to character. Yeah, real transformation, it starts on the inside. And some of these guys in the audience know what I'm talking about. That's enough.
Well, Doc, I want to hit hard. I want to take it a step further, because we talk about the excuses, but the reality is we got to look at the barriers. Let's look at the barriers. Let's look what's there. And I'm speaking from my perspective. It's been in and out the system and so on and so forth. I was just watching 13th the other day, and it really, it's an eye-opener. Everybody needs to watch it, because what it does is it speaks to reality of what happens. It's not the fact. When I was in prison, one thing I learned, you got a lot of brothers that want to be in their kid's life. Absolutely. But statistics and data tell you that they don't want to be there. Absolutely. They tell you they want to be in the streets, they want to sell dope, they want to rob and kill. But the reality is, why are they doing that? When I sold dope, when I had to get out here and do what I had to do, it wasn't because I wanted to be like Jeezy or any other them. I had kids, I had a mother, I had sisters and brothers, I had nieces and nephews. I had to grind. When I got my bread, it went home. Like you, but I won't mind going to summer job for 8 weeks. But when I grind, it went back into the family. So if we could start tackling society, stop viewing, especially young black males, as criminals and whatnot, and start to understand the culture. And even as the black community, we build our own culture because we're lost. Our culture right now is rap and this and that. We can't tell you of the days when Martin Luther King or, Medgar Evers and many other great leaders sacrificed their lives for us to have the opportunities we do this day. So if we start tackling these barriers that's there, then you can start tackling issues from birth, because then that man or that father has the opportunity to be in that home, gateway doors are open, things grow. Just that simple.
Mike, what did the Beatles say? Come together right now over me. And the subject needs to be males. It needs to be young males. It needs to be children. And when we can pull everybody together, when we can pull the faith community, when we can pull what the media is saying, when we can pull everyone together and sew that together and say, we are going to come up as a people, as a nation, community, and really have a plan to do this. And human nature is selfish. But, I really believe that because they've seen the decline of malehood, manhood, that somebody's got to be able to bring the change together. And it doesn't have to come through a president. It has to come through a people.
Yeah. That's the last word. That's the last word. We'll end there. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. To learn more about Opportune Indie, go to opportuneindie.com. There is also other literature out at the table about Opportune Indie and upcoming convention or conference, the social status of black males in November. I'm not sure if there's any other information out there. Of course, everybody is familiar, hopefully, with WFYI. Hopefully, you are NPR listeners and subscribers and patrons and donors. One big happy community, but could you please just give a thunderous applause to this wonderful panel? Thank you. Be safe going home. Thank you. And feel free, as you have time, they close at 8 o'clock here, but if you want to greet or to speak with any of the panelists, feel free to do so. Thank you.